Usman Haque is an architect and an artist who works with technology. He is the founder and creative director of Umbrellium, a London-based design and build studio dedicated to transforming urban environments. He also co-founded HaqueTan to inspire change by combining all of his expertise simultaneously. His work embraces many disciplines including architecture, design, the Internet of Things, urban community infrastructure, and large-scale public art and performances. In this episode, we discuss about his passion for interactive architecture and technology and how it can inspire change among people towards urban environments and human behaviors. Assalamu alaikum and hello everyone. I am Azban Sari, the founder of the organization Peacemakers Pakistani, and I am bringing you the stories of placemakers, artists, and professionals from around the globe about how they created an impact and made change happen. You are listening to the Making It Happen show. Thank you for joining in. Enjoy the episode. Hello, sir. Thank you so much for joining me today. How are you and how's life going?
Everything is good here. Thank you very much for having me. I'm looking forward to chatting with you.
Same here. I'm so happy for doing this with you, and I'm so glad that I have met you in person before doing it. So it's the vibe is different. It was different with Ma'am Ling as well. So I'm looking forward to having this chat with you. And I'm so very weak in this area, maybe less interested in the technology part. So I wanted to learn more about it and get a little bit excited on this area, this field of architecture. And so I'm looking forward to it. Let's start.
For sure. We might be joined by my cat Taku, who is always very envious when I am talking to someone else.
That's awesome. Oh, and your toddler is nowhere around, I think.
No, she's at nursery today. That's right. Did you meet her when we were there?
Yeah, she was adorable child. Great. Okay, so as said, I would like to know that how did you find your passion for interactive spaces and community activation? What inspired you on that?
Well, so I was studying architecture in the early 90s, and so there were several steps towards this, if you see me. And I remember being very struck by the fact that architecture publications were filled with photographs of buildings and no people. And it was always really bizarre to me that the celebration of the architectural profession was, if you like, the kind of the static, immutable, physical, hard stuff, and not so much the experiential and kind of immersive quality, if you like, of architecture, which really only makes sense when there's people. There's people there to perceive it, to be part of it, and really, in a sense, to make it become something through activities in it. And so, from the very first moments that I was studying architecture, I was always trying to think about, okay, how are people relating to each other in this space? What are the implications of that? What does that look like? How do you design for that? And so I got interested in interactive environments more generally because I was always a little skeptical of the idea that the architect should define and control everything, when I know very well that as soon as an architect has put something into the world, the people that occupy it, that inhabit that space, completely transform it into something else. And I remember being very surprised. I was working for an architect in New York in the late 90s. And I remember him coming back from a meeting really frustrated. We'd designed a hospital, and he came back and saying, I couldn't believe they'd moved, the furniture from this side of the space to the other side of the space. It was all designed to be on that side. And I asked him, I guess they probably had a reason for it, right? And he said, yeah, well, they couldn't fit their trolleys through otherwise. And I said, that, to me, that sounded like a very reasonable thing to do. And what's really interesting to me is that actually, in a sense, the ultimate designers of space are the people that inhabit and occupy and bring it to life, much more so than the architect, really, at least from my perspective. And so I was kind of interested in this idea of interactive environments simply because it decenters, I suppose, the architect and puts much more importance in the final creation of the experience or the interaction, if you like, on people within the space. And so that's kind of how I got into interactive architecture. Funnily enough, like the interest in community participation and engagement, in retrospect, I can tell the story as if there was a natural progression from one to the next. But in actual fact, it wasn't quite so smooth. What happened was that I was in the kind of late 90s, early 2000s. I was doing quite a lot of work that was large scale and spectacular, sometimes temporary, and interactive. And quite often, members of the public would stop by while we were setting up or while we were constructing something or building it, and be very intrigued, and in some cases would want to be part of what we were creating. And we always used to have barriers up and say, no, 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 don't come and, it's a bit dangerous, it's a bit complicated. And at one point in a project, I realized that, we had a very tight budget and we were often struggling to be able to construct within the budget. And it suddenly occurred to me, I've got all these members of the public that want to be part of something. I've got this constraint with budget. It means I don't have enough, I can't find enough people to actually pay to build this thing. What if I designed the system so that all the people that want to be part of building it could be part of it? And it kind of started like that in a somewhat pragmatic way. And it was only at that point that I started thinking about, well, how does one actually design in such a way as to connect up this idea of interactive environments, which are kind of created and configured ultimately by the occupant, and the idea of actually designing in order to enable other people to make decisions even during the construction phase and not just in the occupancy phase. And it was kind of an outcome of all of that that got me really interested in the idea of participatory platforms and frameworks and things like that.
Awesome. And I'm so happy to know that you were thinking through the entire process and you were also, you know, concerned about the people and their participation and their emotions because that's attached to it as well. And also it saves some sort of energy of the architects as well, I guess, because it brings more pride in the and more ownership in the project, the way when we involve people. So I love that idea, and and it's very inspiring that you focused on building the system to enhance and the process of it to facilitate the entire process. So that's very inspiring. I'm so happy to know that. Great. Okay, so recently you just announced that you have started your company HaqueTan. So congratulations on that. I was happy to know that.
Thank you very much.
What is your vision for HaqueTan, and what are the projects that you are going to work on, if I put it that way? What sort of people should collaborate with you, or what sort of projects you are aiming at? And also, your first project, while Imaginarium, is basically one of the manifestation or one of the execution of your idea of interactive spaces. So, what is your main long-term or short-term goals around it?
So HaqueTan came about. In fact, it'd be interesting to hear Ling's response to this because I know that you spoke with her as well. But it came about because Ling and I had been collaborating for more than 10 years, um, uh, working on a range of design and art and urban technology projects, specifically within my other company, Umbrellium. Now, along the way, I think we worked on many, many different types of thing, usually involving urban context, involving technology, involving design, interactive environments, and everything. But to a certain extent, it was a process where we would just do a lot of very different work, always different scales, different mediums, different communities, different geographies, different scales. You know, everything from augmented reality interfaces to working on air quality issues to designing infrastructure, permanent infrastructure for public space to even pedestrian crossings and all these kind of things. And I think that what we realized more recently is something that I think we've both worked on for many years, but we realized that this is the time to really make a big push at it, which is that the design of the built environment today, given all the complexities of the way we relate to each other and our environments and the decisions that we make, and also given the state of technology and how much technology is informing those relationships, the design of the built environment really needs to integrate both a physical design approach as well as a digital design approach. Now, up until now, those things have kind of been separate. To a certain extent, architects have taken care of designing physical space, and technology companies like Google and Apple, et cetera, largely from Silicon Valley, have designed the way that we interact digitally, either through, online platforms or through mapping systems or through all the kind of things, the home automation systems that we use, are all designed by these large companies. And we thought it was time really to merge those two together, to bring that expertise in the built environment, in understanding how people occupy space and relate to space and to each other, and the digital technology that we have now many years of experience in building and designing for, and create an architecture studio that merges both in the work. And so HaqueTan is really about that blending of digital and physical, the blending of natural and artificial, the so-called real and virtual, not so that they're separate things, not so that you have a building and then you have an interactive installation, or you have you have a public space and then you have a projection. It's actually the merging of these two things so that the built form is brought to life through interactive technologies that create the meaningful experience that the occupants or people who use that space generate over time through repeatedly relating to it or other people within that space. And so HaqueTan was basically launched to as a design studio, much more than a design build studio that we'd previously run. Working in the built environment, working alongside architects, working alongside engineers to create both public and potentially private space design, but informed and underpinned by technology.
Yes, and that showcases in the project the Wild Imaginarium. I love the pictures and all the stuff on the social media. I've seen it, and it's lovely and it's very inspiring. And in the episode with the Mamling, it was amazing how she mentioned how it came into existence. So it's great that we patched both of your interviews to answer this one question. So it's a lovely one. I love the idea
Thank
of
you.
having children on board and engaging them in creating the project. So it must be, um, a very hardworking thing. It must be a hard work, and the outcome is amazing. So
Thank you very much. I'm
yeah.
very pleased you say that. The interesting thing about working with young people, the exciting thing actually is particularly when you're working on this conjunction of technology systems and natural systems, which is something we were trying to do in Wild Imaginarium, is there's two things. One is that I think the sense of awe and mysticism that adults have towards technology is very different in kids. It's sort of matter of fact, but it's also very exciting, to do stuff, for young people to do stuff and to create stuff and to see it manifest. And then the second thing is that I think young people have not yet forgotten what adults have forgotten, which is that natural beings, non-human species, do have personhood. They are sentient creatures, and they do potentially have personalities and and quirks and idiosyncrasies, and I think relate to non-human species, whether they're plants or animals or insects or what have you, in a very different way. And so it's really interesting to work with them.
Yes, and I can imagine it. Yeah, how the process must have been. Awesome. I would applaud you for that project and the way you bring it into existence. So congratulations on that.
Thank you very much. But as you know, it was co-created with all the young kids, so they deserve absolutely as much credit because what you see in the
Definitely,
final thing, every single aspect of that was created by one child.
definitely. Great. Okay, so what do you think? Where is the world standing in terms of technology in urban environment, and where do you wish it to be?
So I kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but I think that my my concern about technology arises from who and how it's created. And I say this as somebody that's worked within the technology industry now for almost actually, yeah, almost 30 years. I've built technology, I've built technology companies, I have I've contributed to a certain extent to the discipline of technological innovation, I suppose. So when I say this, I don't say this from an entirely critical perspective, but I do understand that how technology is created and who creates it is not neutral. It's not like technology is just out there and it's up to us to figure out how to use it. Somebody somewhere decides how and where and why a piece of technology is created. And my concern at the moment stems from the fact that in many cases, the technologies that are becoming most widespread among us all are decided, designed, and built by a very small group of people, almost entirely in Silicon Valley, very large percentage of whom are male and white, um, and increasingly in other parts of the world as well, potentially, but still with this sense of being a fairly small group of people making quite big decisions about how we're going to interact with each other. We ordinary people are going to interact with each other in, well, both in person and across distance, and how we're going to interact with our environments. There's a whole bunch of companies that one could talk about that, whether it's in the companies I spoke about, or whether it's other companies getting involved in AI or getting involved in smart city technology. And the issue with that is that primarily technology companies, for all sorts of reasons, are really driven by profit. And they're driven, and they have to be driven to essentially see the world. And particularly when you talk about the design of space and the built environment, to see the city as a problem to be solved, and that's why typically smart city marketing talks about how, oh, this technological solution can solve congestion, it can solve air quality, it can solve social isolation. And when you've worked in the built environment for a while, you start to understand that almost none of these problems are solvable in isolation. Every single act that you carry out has impacts on other things within the context of the city. In a sense, we could solve air quality very easily just by stopping the use of any vehicle or factory. Now, that would very clearly have massive implications on all other forms of the way that we exist on this planet. Um, and so purely technology focus on trying to solve these problems, I think, does not fully understand the holistic and systemic nature of the challenges that we face. Having said that, technology, yes, can help us in managing a whole bunch of these issues as long as we understand the interrelatedness and the connectedness between all these things, and most importantly, the very different types of impact any of those propositions can have on very different communities. And I think that's a key thing that one needs to understand in the kind of deployment of any technology, that it affects different people in very different ways. There is no average impact. There is no typical way that somebody is affected by someone. There really are very different ways that these things affect people. And so the decision making that goes on in deciding on a technology, in building it, in how it's created, in the context of AI, who is building it, and who's involved in the building of it. All of these things, I think, are really complex issues. And so that's where my concern from technology arises. Where I'm kind of excited and motivated is that isn't really in its potential to enable us to do things, to imagine things, and to accomplish things that I think we never could have before. I mean, just the fact that you and I can have this conversation right now, as we are doing 30 years ago, obviously would not have been available to ordinary mortals like us. And so the technology there is supporting, if you like, almost a superpower. And that's where it's exciting. So what I'm trying to do really is to bring those two things closer together, figure out how more people can be involved in the designing, the deciding, the building, the creating, and the deployment of technology, and understanding what kind of impact it can have on their lives. And at the same time, try to explore these kind of new modalities of experience and interaction and relationship that technology affords when it's approached from a creative perspective. So that's kind of my vision, I suppose, for working in this area. It's figuring out how we can collectively design and decide shared futures where we don't necessarily all agree on the future, and we don't necessarily all have to agree. I'm shaking the table. Don't necessarily all have to agree on that future, but where technology enables us to connect with each other in new ways and to have a scale of impact that was previously not easy to achieve.
Great. And yes, I'm so happy that you mentioned the points that we have to be considerable about the people and how it's affecting their lives. Because the AI thing is somewhat um, alarming to us in some aspects, because, the things related to it. But of course, it is also benefiting to a lot of people. And the thing you mentioned that clicked to me was that this all of it is helping us. It can help us in better management of places, which is the right thing. Because for example, there is one of the Australian company, Nebalytics, founded by Lucinda Hartley, and we talked about it. And the purpose of it is to gather data about um, people's behavior and the community lifestyle, and they collect the data and they use it in the way to inform about the public spaces or use of it, and which places are activated at what time of the day and stuff like that. And then they use it in the placemaking, they use it as a placemaking strategy to for the urban development of the places, you know.
Hmm.
So it was very inspiring to me to know that yes, this is also an amazing way, and they were doing it during the COVID and the shift, and with the shift happening, they were recording the data. And
Hmm.
it was inspiring because a lot of things can be dictated from it. Of course, the crime rates can be also addressed. So I was thinking in terms of if we have such thing in Pakistan as well, because a lot of things, if there are if there is a data about it, which we lack in Pakistan, if we have data about it, we can manage things. We can actually identify the areas to be worked upon. So it's exactly what the point that I wanted to know, and that you have mentioned it, that it can help manage things. Of course, it will not bring the solution. Solution has to be by the people, but management is going to be easy on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think that my perspective on data, particularly in public space, is that it's very important, I think, to understand that data is not just out there waiting to be captured or recorded or observed. It's not a neutral medium, if you like, because take air quality, for example. If you are measuring pollution, first of all, there's a decision that you might make, which is, am I measuring PM 1.0, PM 2.5? Am I measuring NO2, SO2, carbon monoxide? All of these different things that you could be measuring that are part of pollution. And typically, one has to measure some and not the others and make a decision about why a certain type is important. And, certain aspects of pollution might be important from a health perspective or a respiratory perspective. Others might be important from from a carbon management perspective or what have you. So that's a decision, first of all, that somebody has to make. Next, you have to decide where to measure. And typically, to get the so-called best objective data, these sensors, these air quality monitors, are typically put about 3 or 4 meters off the ground, right? And then distributed evenly across the city. Now, that gives a good-ish macro perspective on air quality across the city. But if you're a parent with a child pushing a baby in a pushchair, you're much more concerned about what the air quality is at 75 centimeters off the ground and not at 4 meters. And you're really not that concerned about whether we have a great map of the entire city, in which you probably, in many cases, don't really have the financial fluidity to just move wherever you want to whatever happens to be the best air quality neighborhood at any particular time. So those maps don't really help the ordinary citizen. Um, and secondly, those maps tend to be generated for the local authority using sensors that are distributed several hundred meters apart, where actually we know that the air quality varies from meter to meter, both in the X and Y as well as the Z dimension. All of which is to say that even something like air quality, which we can probably all agree is an important thing to measure, how it's measured, why it's measured, what transformation it leads to, what decisions you can make, what equipment is used, which aspects of air quality, all of these are decided by someone. And for me, the question is actually not so much the data as the decision making that goes into capturing one type of data and not another. So, what I'm quite often looking for in terms of data representations of an environment is how can ordinary people make that decision themselves, measure the air quality, for example, where they want to, when they want to, and how they want to. Because in particular, in one project, what we found, which was really interesting, was when you empower people to make those decisions themselves, they actually get much better at understanding air quality to the extent that it turns out they don't even need digital sensors to measure that data, and that their own senses, their own perception and observation about the context and just smelling the air and everything are almost as good and accurate as a digital sensor, which is a really interesting thing to find, that you use digital technology to get people to go and explore. And then it turns out that that process of exploring really helps train them to not need the technology in the first place.
So basically, you have accomplished the goal of bringing awareness to people, which is just to be in the present moment and use their senses instead of relying.
That's right. Yeah.
So that's such a proud moment. And
well, it was interesting because
Yeah.
that was a project actually that Ling and I worked on together, Pollution Explorers. And one of the things we found, one of the outcomes of this was that in terms of changing behavior, people actually deciding to do something different, by going through this process of really learning themselves how to observe the environment, their behavior change was much more sticky. It would last longer. They had more of an impact, really. And that was a very interesting thing to find out, that if you actually want people to change, if you want things to change for on an ongoing and sustainable basis, involving them in the process is actually the way to do it.
Yes, exactly. That's the right way to do it. Awesome. I would like to know that how do you define sustainable mobility? Your project Starlink's Crossing is about promoting the pedestrian safety and their empowerment. So how does it function, and how was it has it been implemented in practice for real? And what were the outcomes of it?
Yeah, sure. So the Starling Crossing, we created the first proof of concept in 2017 in South London. So that's about 7 years ago. We basically created a fully interactive pedestrian crossing that responds to and is really prioritizing pedestrians rather than vehicles. And our idea with this was that up until now, the last sort of 80 years of crossing design has prioritized vehicles, and then people have to kind of fit into that. But in the 21st century, we need much more flexibility to respond to not just pedestrians, but all sorts of micromobility solutions, including cyclists, scooters, and so on and so forth. And so that was a proof of concept. And what happened was that we discovered actually that so in the project, what we had was we had a camera vision system and we had a hardware output. In other words, we had a fully interactive road surface. And then we had the software that drove it, that basically looked at what was going on the scene and decided how to control the different bits of hardware. What we discovered was that there was actually a lot of work around the world on the hardware side of this kind of infrastructure. So the kind of the road technology, the LEDs embedded in roads and in curbside, and also in warning signals, and also lane signal changers and all of this kind of stuff. But there was very little work on the kind of the control system, the control and decision system to manage all of these bits of hardware. So we started focusing most on developing that software with our understanding both of the built environment, the complexity of that, as well as people in the city and how diverse those kind of perspectives can be. And in 2020, it basically spun out as a separate company. So it spun out of Umbrellium into a company called Starling Technologies. And so Starling Technologies is now an independent company. And it is producing stuff in the world. We've done stuff in the UK, in France, Japan, Netherlands. We had a pilot in Canada. and so hopefully we'll be going elsewhere. And essentially, what we're trying to work on is this idea that there's kind of two main drivers, if you like, in what we're trying to do. One is the fact that cities are trying to move towards more sustainability, and as a result of that, they are having to basically make cities more pedestrian friendly, more walkable, to embrace all kinds of different mobility solutions. As I mentioned, cyclists, scooters, increasingly things like even hoverboards, but also to make sure that these cities are friendly towards, for example, visually impaired, to wheelchair users, to people with pushchairs, for example, and to basically redesign our urban infrastructure to prioritize those in the right circumstance, in the same way that historically vehicles have been prioritized. Because obviously, there's as more people are starting to get around on foot or use these other means of transport, designing the urban infrastructure to respond to all of this kind of diversity of mobility system, diversity of approach, et cetera, is actually a really complex thing to do. It's no longer really enough for there just to be a timer on a pedestrian crossing. And in fact, the research has shown that accidents at crossings typically take place because people are impatient, because the timer is just not very good. You either run because you think you can make it, or a vehicle gets bored waiting because it thinks there's nobody at a crossing and therefore accelerates through it. So that's the area we're trying to work in. And then the other kind of driver of what we're trying to look at is the fact that there's, as we know, quite a big push in many parts of the world towards implementing autonomous vehicles, or things like delivery bots and things like that in cities. And very often they're sold with this idea, or the proposition is sold with the idea that they're going to make streets safe. Now, that might be true if the streets were 100% automated, and if you segregated all of the traffic from one another, so that the road area is 100% controllable by a system that has full awareness of every actor and every vehicle in the scene. That is very unlikely to happen at all, and certainly almost definitely not going to happen for at least 20 years. Which essentially means that as these autonomous vehicles start to appear in our roads, mixed in with all of these other mobility solutions, mixed in with this push to have, more pedestrian prioritization, it's going to be chaotic. And we've already seen that a number of the AV companies have had all sorts of accidents with pedestrians, and in some cases actually had to slow the rollout of their vehicles, because their systems are all built purely with their vehicle in mind, and can only kind of see just around them, and they don't have this kind of macro perspective or even awareness of the complexity of the city. And so that's the other driver that we're trying to work on, which is, how do you enable the safe flow of people, vehicles, micromobility solutions, all these kind of different types of road users, some of whom are more vulnerable than others, in complex cities, so that you're not just prioritizing vehicle throughput, but you're actually making it a more pleasant, inviting, encouraging, and sustainable framework in which all of these different kind of interactors are trying to just basically get to wherever they're going.
Yes, it was a very interesting and inspiring project to me because it felt like uh, in a very different and unique way, it is trying to bring awareness to people about the existence of pedestrians in this fast-paced life. Sometimes we as pedestrians also forget that we matter and our lives matter, and we don't need to rush the way vehicles are, or we need to compete with them. But yes,
That's right.
bringing their presence into awareness, it's a great way to do it. And I will definitely link this project in the description box below as well for the people to know because it's amazing and it's documented well as so we can see it and understand how it's happening.
Hmm.
Amazing. Okay, so there's
Thank
one,
you.
yeah, welcome. Okay, so there's one thing that I love to ask people is about their place attachment stories because the place you were born and raised in and how it shaped your personality or the work that you do. So is there any role that your place attachment stories has to do with the work you do?
That's a good question. I suppose, I moved around a lot when I was young. And in particular, between the US, where I was born, um, the UK, where my mother's from, and my father's Pakistani, we moved around quite a lot. We'd certainly go back and forth quite a bit. And so one could argue, and in fact, my architecture degree project was all about this. That I'm always searching for a sense of home, and so I don't have attachment to a particular place, but I have kind of palimpsests of memory in almost a dozen different cities, and that sense of discrete and quite different experiences attached to very different spaces and different cultures and different people and different relationships that I've kind of observed or been part of. Um, that's kind of what drives the kind of work I do. I've not really thought about it very deeply, but um, I think that's why I have this sense, possibly, of wanting to create the place not just by physical form, but by inhabiting and experiencing and kind of interacting with an environment.
Lovely. That's good to know. I'm happy that I asked you this. And also that I think just because you have been in different places and you're able to adopt to things, so I believe it helps you in helping people create things for them. Like, when we are associated only with one place or we are attached to one place, it's hard to break free from the cage or from this limited mindset. And when we have been to different, we have attachment to different areas of life and not just one single thing. We are able to create
Mm,
more experiences in a different manner and in different places as well.
yeah.
So I love the idea that how you mentioned that your projects are in different places as well. And it directs back to how your experience has shaped it. Lovely. Okay, so
Thanks.
there is one thing like I was a bit hesitant, but I was like, okay, sure. Like I usually go to the LinkedIn profile when I prepare the questions, and the only thing that was written there was that um, you are very skillful in catching things that fall the fridge doors. So I would like to know that who or what gave you the opportunity of being trained on it, like just for sake of humor. I would like to know.
Um, so you're talking about, yeah, in LinkedIn, you're asked to put in your skill. I think so. There's two sides to this. One is that when I try and think about my skills, I I really struggle, because it's like I'm kind of good at programming, but I'm definitely not an expert. I'm kind of good at designing, definitely not an expert. Almost anything that I look at, I don't feel a sense of expertise or pride. And, to a certain extent, I think my work comes about because I I'm really interested and engaged in trying, different things out. But the one skill that I have to say, I'm constantly astonished by in myself, the one skill that I'm actually quite proud of. And, if I'm on my own and it happens, then I regret that nobody was there to witness it with me, is somehow when I open the fridge door and, sometimes something falls, I seem to have this reflex action that means I catch it. And I mean, it's something that I've got a very high percentage of success, almost higher than success in any other walk of life that I've kind of come across. And so, yeah, it is something I'm quite proud of, that I catch things that fall from the fridge doors. Or, I mean, it also extends to that skill is transferable to things that fall from cupboards, things that fall off of coat hooks, things like that. So yes, I'm quite proud of that.
Amazing. By the way, psychologically, it just shows that you are very present you are mentally aware and present in your present moment. So your reflexes are strong that way. I just loved it. Like I was like, huh? And I wanted to ask you this, and it's amazing.
Thank you.
Like, something
If there were a
is
world
very
championship,
important.
if there were a world championship, I would definitely enter it, but I just can't find anyone else who thinks that they're good at it.
Okay, so dads are famous about catching toddlers falling off, and like you mentioned, you put it in your profile that I can catch. Like you can certainly catch things falling off the ground during your project execution as well. I'm sure that.
I'm not sure about that.
Okay, so that's very humble of you. Okay, so let's continue.
Not well enough to put that on my LinkedIn profile. Not yet.
Okay,
Let's see.
okay,
Give me a few more years. I'll see if I get slightly better at that.
I'll wait. I'll certainly wait. Okay, so let's keep this energy going. And there are some few rapid fire questions which I ask everyone. The previous
Okay.
one was solely for you. So, what drives you? What keeps you focused on the work that you do?
Um, I wish I knew. I really do wish I knew. I don't know, and it's sometimes frustrating in the sense that if you become too self-conscious and too self-aware in the work you're doing, you start to second guess and question yourself. So I don't actually know. If I knew that, then I'd be able to return to that and focus myself again. But quite often I can't verbalize it.
Okay, so if you allow me to put it somehow, that would be like you are making great contribution into the world and inspiring young ones like us. So keep doing it.
Well, thank you. That's a very generous way of putting it. I mean, I think I do want to kind of make clear that like it's as much a struggle for me as I think it is for anyone, and it has not got easier for me.
It never does.
Yeah, so don't be under the impression somehow that things get smoother or easier. It's like you're either like if you have a sense of creativity and curiosity, and to a certain extent a kind of almost like a discomfort with the way the world is, and a desire to affect it, that doesn't go away. So you never get to the point at which you're like, yes, I've finished my task. I have changed the world and I can now go and lie down.
Yeah.
No, it never goes away.
And sometimes it's frustrating as well. Like it's not ending. It's not ending. But yeah, it keeps it going as well. Okay,
It is,
so
yes.
would you like to share any proudest moment of your work life?
I mean, I still go back to the catching things from falling from fridge doors. That really is the proudest moment. That is the moment at which I look around. Is anyone looking at this? Is anyone looking? You saw that, didn't you? And then somebody will be like, I saw that. That was impressive.
That's amazing. Like this energy needs to be there. Okay. Any hardest moment of your work life? Ever failed at catching the things?
There have been some failures. I can't pretend that there was 100% there. No, I mean, in terms of the work, um, I once actually did a public talk, which was titled A Chronicle of My Failures, which was really looking at every project and the things that had gone wrong. I would say every project has its challenges, its complexities, its failures, things that in the moment seem absolutely tragic. And I mean, I have literally cried on site at projects, like no exaggeration, just for exhaustion and frustration. um so it's very hard to pinpoint one single hard thing, but I think that hopefully in retrospect, like, when you look back at those moments and you realize that was part of the process, and you can't really have the joy and energy and excitement without also having the other side.
Honest reply, it was. Lovely. I agree to it. Okay, is there any favorite quote of yours that you love to remember while you work or anything like that? Mantra or something?
Um, you're putting me on the spot, because I would say that I do refer to other people's work quite a lot. Um, I don't have a specific one, although I often return to what Wittgenstein said, which I'm going to really badly misquote, but essentially, you know, anything that can be said must be said clearly, and everything else can be passed over in silence, or something like that. Um, I think about that one a lot. I've probably horribly massacred that quote, but the general gist of it is something I return to a lot.
Okay, so it means like being clear with your words, or what
I
you
think
say is has to be the
it's
clear. It has to be clear in your own mind before you say it.
I think it speaks I think it speaks to partly clarity of thought, but it's also a kind of a philosophical position about the relationship between language and what we see and create in the world. That kind of quite complex relationship that our perception is so wrapped in our ability to describe what we see and what we create. And in other words, yes, it is about being clear, but it's also being aware of the limitations of language to frame what we're experiencing.
Great. Okay, so how was your visit to Pakistan, and what is your opinion about Pakistan in general?
We had a fantastic time. We were there for almost 6 weeks, and I hadn't been back for several years. So I had a lot of family visits, of course, but also this was the first time that I visited without my father and kind of set my own agenda. Well, obviously, along with Ling, we set our own agenda, and we got to meet so many interesting people, including you, of course, and others, in the same discipline. And we were really energized by it. Really had a great time. Really fantastic to see the enthusiasm and the passion and the dedication, which was not a surprise to me. I've certainly, like the previous time I'd been, I actually taught a 1 week workshop and was experienced all the passion and dedication and enthusiasm previously. But yeah, it was really wonderful to see, and we had a great time. Definitely want to come back again soon, and hopefully we'll be cooking up something in order to do so.
Great. Looking forward to that. And I was very, inspired by knowing that you were so exhausted, you were tired, but still you showed up as 246 and you presented the project and we get to know about you. So it was amazing, man.
I
Um,
think that was the night that our daughter was also sitting on our lap in the middle of the talk, right? And
yes,
running around, and yes.
yes. And she was adorable child. And she was not leaving you guys. Although we were all up to play with the child, but it was, I guess, her past her bedtime. I think so. That was the
It
problem.
was long past her bedtime, yes.
Yeah. So amazing. Okay. Lastly, is there any advice for the young professionals who are joining in?
Um, I would say two things. First of all, I would say that, within the profession of design, within the discipline of design, one thing I've found is that it's very helpful to try and build while you design. By that, I don't just mean a small model, but actually be thinking about the one-to-one scale, and that it is possible to prototype interactions at one-to-one, partly by imagining, partly by drawing, and so on and so forth. But try not to think about the design and build as two separate phases. I think the reason I'm saying this is because quite often in the architecture profession, architects think of themselves as a designer and somebody else is going to do the building. And that's a very big gap between them. And particularly when, and if you're interested in the relationships of people to their environment, it's useful while you're designing to just try stuff out. One thing that we quite often do is, like if we're thinking about an environment or a space, we'll kind of go and act it out as if we were people in that space. And what would that look like or feel like? What angle would your head be looking up? What does that feel like? All these kind of things, just to fully understand that. Um, that's the first thing. The second thing I would say is that I sort of said it before, but it's don't expect things to just one day just magically fall into place and you're suddenly going to feel like you've accomplished lots of stuff. If you have that creative push and if you have that sense of wonder about the world, that will continue to drive you, and it'll continue to be a little bit frustrating as well. And the thing to do is to get comfortable with that, to get comfortable with that discomfort, and um, not be dissuaded by it.
Great advices, and the second one, I'm still working on it, and somewhat have reached that point where I'm okay with like I'm anticipating the discomfort, and I'm still adjusting to the idea of getting comfortable there. So it's lovely to have this reminder always. Thank you so much, sir, for your time. It was a lovely talk, and I was honored to have this one-on-one session with you and to learn directly from you. I really appreciate it.
Very nice to chat. Really, really lovely to chat and to reconnect after meeting in person over there.
Definitely.
And I wish you all the best.
Thank you so much. Take care and have a good day.
You as well. Take care. Bye bye.
Bye.